Hello, all, and welcome to It's Your Time, Life After Retirement. I'm Dory Branch. I'm the Associate Director of the Bobcat Career Network at the Ohio University Alumni Association. This event is part of our New Year, New Career series that provides Ohio University alumni with lifelong career support. So we're always looking to hear from you, our alumni. In fact, we actually sent out a survey recently on February 10th from the Alumni Association. So hopefully you all received the link to that and have been able to provide us with some feedback. We really look forward to hearing from you. If you didn't all get that, please shoot me a message in the chat and I would be happy to get that link to you. If you have any questions or comments throughout the panel, please feel free to put them in the chat function, the Q&A function. You'll be able to see where it says all panelists. You can address it to all of us so that all of our panelists will be able to see your question, and our moderator will make sure that we get to those, whether throughout the presentation or at the very least during our Q&A portion. We have some really fun, exciting things to talk about today, so I know we want to get started. So I'll go ahead and introduce our moderator, Colleen Carrow. Colleen is a 30-year resident of Athens, a 3-time Bobcat, and an Ohio University employee of more than 20 years. Prior to her current role as the Director of Alumni Success for the Alumni Association, she was the Senior Director of Communications for the Rust College of Engineering and Technology for more than 17 years. So with that, I'll pass it off to Colleen.
Thanks so much, Dory, and thanks for everyone for joining us today. We have a great group of panelists today. I'm really looking forward to the talk. I know it's going to be an awesome time. So I would love to introduce them. First, we have Mike Johnson. He received his Bachelor of Science in Journalism from Ohio University in 1967. He's also an alumnus of Cleveland State's Marshall Law School and Stanford's Graduate School of Business. He served a couple of years in the Army, including about a year in Korea. And during his 35-year business career, he worked at 3 Fortune 500 companies, and those were General Electric, TRW, and Timken, where he wrapped up his career as a corporate vice president of communications. He served Big Brothers of America for 14 years as a big brother for 2 fatherless boys. He has coached youth baseball and soccer for 22 years, and he has researched and written 6 historic novels. Impressive. Have to learn a little bit more about those. He joined SCORE, which is the nation's largest network of volunteer expert business mentors, as a counselor in 2007, and has also served as chapter chairman and district director. So very busy, active and involved guy. Peg Mckechnie received her Bachelor of Science in Journalism from Ohio in 1966. A member of the corporate communications team for Wells Fargo for 26 years, she was responsible for counseling senior management and the strategic planning of communications programs. Peg is also active with various organizations, including the Association for Women in Communications, in which she's been a member for 26 years. She has served as Vice President Finance on the National Board of Directors, host committee chair for a national conference, a member of the National Financial Advisory Committee, and also president of the Denver chapter for 2 years. She served 9 years on the board of the Colorado chapter of PRSA, including 1 year as president, among other activities. And since retiring in 2002, she has traveled to, are you ready? Turkey, the Czech Republic, India and Bhutan, Chile and Argentina, China, Iceland, Scotland, Egypt, and Japan. I would like to hear about those trips. It's fabulous. So welcome, Peg. Then we have Scott Roberts. He received his Bachelor of Generalized Studies from Ohio in 1973, went on to receive his Master's in Philosophy from DePaul University in 1975, and his JD from Ohio State's College of Law in 1979. He practiced law for 33 years. He was self-employed as the sole proprietor of his own law practice and retired in 2013. And he is now retired and living in sunny Orlando and has been able to pursue his ballroom dancing passion, competing nationally. He also started a ministry in 2016 to entertain rest home residents and local hospital patients via song. Really love that. And then Pam Parker Seymour, former Athenian, received her Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Ohio in 1975 and her Master of Science in Journalism and Public Relations from Ohio in 2000. She's a former Athens resident, as I mentioned, for 33 years. She was the first director of the Dairy Barn Arts Center for 11 years, and then joined the Rusk College of Engineering and Technology at Ohio University for 9 years, spearheading the Third Century campaign there. She later became the university's first associate VP for external relations, overseeing the expansion of the airport and starting the first federal relations program. And she then served as executive vice president of United Way of the Bluegrass in Lexington, Kentucky for 7 years, rounding out her career at the Lighthouse Homeless Shelter in Annapolis, Maryland, as development director. She is now living there, retired in 2017, and co-founded a social enterprise bakery called Rise and Shine that's ready to start up again post-pandemic. So lots of great experiences among our panelists, both career experiences and activities that they are staying involved with to stay active and engaged in and do lots of great things. So we're going to jump in with some questions. You've heard enough from me. It's time to hear from them. And we'll kind of go round robin. If you do have questions for our panelists, feel free to drop them in the chat. And I'll do my best to address those if they pop up and I can slot them in. Otherwise, we'll try to get to them at the end. So let's go ahead and we'll start with Pam. And then I'll call on each of our panelists and they can answer the question. Pam, I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit, when you started in your career, when did you start planning for retirement? Did you have your eyes on the prize for a while? Was there an event or something else that was the catalyst?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to be here. Fellow Bobcats. Woo-hoo. I never planned for retirement at all. I was one of those people who said I was going to work forever. And you finally get to a point, I think, where you say, I think I'm ready to do something else. And it really was an event for me. There was a crisis at the shelter, and I realized that I was no longer wired for that kind of stress. And so I decided I was going to retire, and I worked as a consultant for a while. And I have to say, I really love being retired. And I'm still active in a lot of things. I have a place in Columbus as well, so I'm involved in the Franklin Park Conservatory. I'm on the women's board there. And as you said here, I'm still working my passion of working with people who have employment barriers and starting a bakery for folks.
Thank you. Mike, what about you? What was your catalyst, or how long had you been thinking about it?
Yeah, well, I started thinking about it in a way that was unexpected. I think when I was in my 40s, I was planning to work till I was at least 65. But as my wife was about a year younger than I, and also a graduate of OU, we met in Ellis Hall, Lynn. She was stricken with an autoimmune disease, and thanks to a specialist at the Cleveland Clinic, he prescribed a regimen that really kept her high functioning for a number of years. But then the symptoms started to show and slow her down, and we were both avid world travelers. And so one spring, we decided to visit Portugal. We spent an entire afternoon sitting in a plaza, and during that conversation, I said, "What would you think if I bailed out of the corporate world?" And she said, "Well, that doesn't sound bad. Can we afford it?" And I'll skip over the answer to that. But on returning, I walked down the hall to our chairman's office and said, "I'm not walking out on you today," but he knew about my wife's situation. I said, "But the finish line is getting close." And actually, he asked me to stay on for another 18 months to help with closing an acquisition and privatizing an operation in Romania. So it took 18 months from that conversation in Lisbon until I actually walked out the door of the corporate world. And those 18 months did give me plenty of time to think about more precisely what I would do after exiting.
Yeah, it's neat. It's almost like you had a moment where you said, this is something I'm going to do, but you had that time period to plan for it.
That's right.
As well as to let your employer know, which is great.
Right.
Yeah. Peg, how about you?
Well, I guess I would be in the same condition as Mike, in a sense of having an event that sort of was the catalyst. I returned from a 3-week trip in Turkey back to work in October of 2002. And I would have to say I'd been thinking about retiring, which is not, anyway, And when I got back to work, my boss said, come and talk to me. And she described how we were restructuring the department in which I was involved, and essentially offered me a package to retire. And so I took her up on it and finished the year out, and then was officially retired as of the 1st of January of 2003.
Nice. And free to travel quite a bit more.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Scott, what's your story?
Thank you, Colleen. First, Dory and Colleen, thank you so much for the honor of participating in this Bobcat seminar. And I'm certainly among a very distinguished panel, Michael, Peg, and Pam. Probably the catalyst for me, I have a twin brother who also graduated from OU, and he got throat cancer. And so I was helping to take care of him. And when your twin has a health scare like that, he's recovered and fine and so on, it affected me. And as Pam mentioned at the outset of our sharing, regardless of how successful one might be in their career and doing well and being paid well and all of that, there comes a point where your spirit says, gosh, I need to do something else. I may not know what it is, but I need to jump and try to redefine who I am in a different way and step away from my comfort zone. So probably Doug's cancer diagnosis is what pushed me to seize the day. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing that story, and so glad he has recovered. I'm wondering how you all went about preparing for this next stage of life. We heard a little bit about Mike with his 18 months, giving his employer notice and spending that time preparing. But there's really so much to consider, personal considerations from, your family members to how you spend your time, those financial issues, and so on. So Mike, I'd like to start with you. If you could, give us some insight into some of the steps you undertook,
Sure.
and some of that thinking you did to get ready.
Well, the business guy in me kind of kicked in, after the decision, and so I did a financial analysis, and complete with making certain assumptions, and of course prepared a spreadsheet. And I told Lynn, I said, I'm going to put it on the kitchen table, and over the next few weeks, when you walk by the table, take a look at what I've put out there. And after several weeks, I said, so what do you think? And she said, gee, it looks like we won't have to make any sacrifices in the way we want to live life. I said, that's right. So for me, it was quite comforting to do that analysis and reach that conclusion. It gave us a real sense of confidence that we could continue to travel the world and do all the other stuff we enjoy doing without having to make any sacrifices. We have 3 kids. We like to be generous to them. We could continue doing that. So that was basically the way we prepared. The other thing I will mention briefly, I'm not sure if we'll cover this later, but I gave myself some goals. And one of them was to see if I could write a book about World War II that would be different from all the other thousands of books that have been written about World War II. So to me, setting goals beyond playing around the golf or the next hand at bridge really is important as you make the transition from the business world or the career world to the post-career or the post-business world.
Thank you. I like that. I like the idea of approaching it as a strategically, I guess, or as a project where you need to have goals for different, those financial goals and those other goals for activities and just personal goals for yourself. So, Peg, how about you? How did you prepare? You also had some time, a little bit different professional situation than Mike did, but you had a little bit of time too.
Yes, I did have a little bit of time, and being a single person with no dependents, it was a little easier for me than for some other folks, I'm sure. So I think my finances fortunately were in good shape, and because I did work until the end of the year, I had 2.5 months to sort of think about what I was going to do with the new free time I was going to have. And I admitted it was probably a slow start, but I did commit myself to trying to walk every day starting at the beginning of 2003. And I know I didn't make every day, but I did enough to increase my stamina and lose some weight. So that was good.
That's awesome. That's another great personal goal. Scott, how did you prepare?
What do I wish I would have known? Like Peg, I am single. I don't have any adult children and I don't have any grandchildren. And what made my retirement a little bit different is that I moved from Ohio, where I grew up, down to a new city and a new state. But I wish I would have been warned that retirement is, for me, very, very much a rite of passage. And a rite of passage can be confusing, it can be painful, it can be uncomfortable. Why is it uncomfortable? Because you're divesting yourself of all of the adult roles that you've embraced your entire life that gave you purpose, direction, and passion. So you're recreating yourself, you're starting over. And certainly that can be liberating, but that can also be very uncomfortable. What else do I wish I would have known? I wish someone would have introduced me to Mark Middleton's book, Growing Bolder, which is the best book on retirement that I've read. What does Middleton do in that book? He takes issue with the mythology in our culture that everything exciting in life happens when you are young, and that age is a disease where you grow more infirm, become less worthy, your life gets smaller and smaller, and then you die. Middleton thinks that's a bunch of bunk. And so he wrote a book to debunk, to disabuse everyone who our culture that embraces that kind of theory. And maybe, as Michael mentioned, we'll touch on this later, but he has a growing bolder formula that in order to grow bolder as opposed to older, that you need to do the following things. And the first is that you need to identify, this is in retirement now, you've given up all your roles and so on, that in retirement, you define or discover your passion. 1, 2, you find a tribe to support yourself in pursuing that passion. 3, you take risks and you step out of your comfort zone. You resist the comfort of staying where you are. 4, you direct your passion, and this is important, towards service in some kind, where you are helping others and participating in something larger than yourself. 5, you hang out with people who have youthful energy. Okay, that's important. 6, you need to be patient with yourself because you're going to fail, you're going to make mistakes, but you're growing bolder and not older. And then lastly, you need to practice self-love because this is going to be difficult. And I find it's really important to affirm who you are as you weather this rite of passage.
Thank you for that so much. I'd like to ask our other panelists some of the same here in just a minute, but I'm also wondering, how did you? So this book sounds really helpful, but how did you prepare? So these are some things that you wish you would have known, but did you undertake any preparations? And
sure, probably about 10 years before I retired, I made certain that I was financially in a good position. And when I bought the home down here in the Villages, I continued to work for another year, not living here, obviously, but living in Columbus, Ohio, where my law practice was located. So that when I moved down here, I was debt free. There was no mortgage, everything, the house was turnkey ready. Everything had been paid for, including the golf cart. Okay. And so the last 10 years of my working life, I was financially preparing. But the biggest hurdle was the emotional preparation, which probably took me by surprise.
I think often we're so focused on some of the financial aspects that maybe we don't consider some of those, more personal or emotional aspects. So it's really
Can I jump in quickly on making that transition?
Yeah, please.
With Lynn's consent, for the first 30 days after I exited the corporate world, we engaged in playtime. And those 30 days meant traveling to California, Oregon, France, And it meant that I arranged to take batting practice 3 times at a local college to see if I could still hit a pitch baseball at age 60. That really helped with the transition, because the day after that, those 30 days were up, I started researching that first book.
That's great. That's great. Pam, let's get to you and hear how you prepared.
Okay, so my story is very different. It was a 5-month lead time. I was actually 2015, and there was a crisis at work, and I realized, as I said, I wasn't wired for that kind. So I decided to retire. My husband was already retired. I was a little worried about the two of us. We'd always, each had our own jobs. Now we were going to be spending an awful lot of time together, and I'm like, oh my God, is this going to work out? And it did. And then I made a very foolish decision and said, let's move back to Kentucky. Want to be closer to the kids in Ohio. And so we up and moved and lived there for a year and decided that isn't really what we want to do. We really love living in Maryland, and we're not that far from Ohio. I do have grown kids. We have 4 grandkids. And I was, the gone mom a lot as a fundraiser for Ohio University. I traveled all over the country and the state. And so I decided I really wanted to spend some of that time that I didn't spend with my own, my grandkids. So, and then moving back to Maryland, I did stay involved with the restaurant that we had established, a social enterprise. And I really didn't really think that much about it, honestly. I still had a lot of friends here and a lot of activities here. And so for me, I didn't do a lot of preparation. I made some dumb mistakes, but we rectified them. And, so I didn't do a lot of prep. We certainly looked at our finances, but I think second only to buying the first boat we bought, buying that house in Kentucky was the second biggest mistake I made.
Thanks for sharing that. Would you mind, while we've got you, would you also share about, anything you wish you had known? We just heard Scott share a little bit about that.
Me? If I had known how much fun
I guess,
this was going to be,
you said you regretted that move to Kentucky.
Yeah. But if I had known how much fun this was going to be, I probably would have retired sooner. I mean, seriously, because I've been able to do whatever I want to do. My life is, for me, the rest of my life, my career is going to be, I just want to do good things. I want to work on women's issues. I want to work on people who are less fortunate, and spread my time that way. And because I am retired and I don't have to go to a 9-to-5 job every day, or actually it was more like 8 to 7, I have the opportunity to really do whatever I want to do and make a difference. So I didn't do a lot of planning, but it's turned out okay.
I love that. Peg, I see you nodding a little bit. I'm curious about what you wish you had known, before starting this part of your life. But I noticed you nodding to Pam's last comments.
I just think she was saying things I would have said if when I was looking at the question. First of all, there's fun, certainly. Yeah, if I'd known it is a lot of fun. It's a good thing. But some of her comments were just things I hadn't ever really thought about, and would certainly have made a difference. I would have to say, I think when it happened to me, I had time to think about stuff before it actually happened. So I can't think of anything that I wished I'd known that I didn't know.
I'd just like to add too that,
yeah,
I think it's important. And I've never applied the word retirement to myself, not once, except for agreeing to be a panelist on this program. I call it the post-business phase of life, which to me has a very different connotation. And I think it's really important as you move into that phase to keep your mind open to possibilities. And I'll just cite an example. Among my involvements, I'm a director of a car show. And folks, I am not a car guy, but I liked what the car show proceeds were doing for a nonprofit. And so that was 10 years ago. I've been serving as a director of a car show. SCORE wasn't on my radar screen either. I was doing a program on one of my books, and a woman came forward and said, I'd like to buy a couple signed copies of your books, make them out to my husband. I did. During the course of that, she said, what do you know about SCORE? I said, not much. She said, would you be my guest at our next chapter meeting? I'm a nice guy. I said, yes. I learned that she was the chapter chair at the time. That was a dozen years ago. So keep your mind open to possibilities.
But Colleen, Somebody
Yeah.
had a question about healthcare, and I think that's a really good question. Can I answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't see that in the chat, so please feel free.
It's a really good
Yeah.
point because I was not 65 when I retired, and it was a concern. Luckily for me, and I think that is a big concern. If you're not 65 when you retire and you don't have Medicare, that's a big issue. And I happen to be, since I was at Ohio University, Ohio Public Employee Retirement System, and I was there long enough so that my health care actually was covered. But I have to say that was probably my number one concern of how to get the bridge between not being 65 and to Medicare. I don't know what everybody else did, but I was fortunate I had a couple of years of healthcare through OPERS.
And any of our other panelists want to
Well,
chime in on
because
that
of my
one?
wife's increasingly fragile health, when I did exit the corporate world, I knew I would have to cover the insurance privately until we both reached 65, if we made it that far. So part of that financial analysis I had done included some homework, which told me how much it was going to cost me. And fortunately, we could afford it. And, I'm grateful that we were in a position to do that. I joked that when I finally reached 65, I got a huge pay cut when Medicare kicked in. I should say a pay increase, not a pay cut.
Right.
Pay increase, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Scott, anything to add about things you wish you'd known after hearing our other panelists share their stories? You gave the book was an awesome resource. I loved that. But anything to add before we move on to our next question?
Well, Colleen, one of the points that Middleton talks about, that I just went through his formula of how to grow bolder as opposed to growing older. And I think it's really, really important. That is that you take your patient or multiple patients and you direct those patients towards the service of others in some way. The Villages, for better or worse, has the reputation of Disney World for adults. And so you have people who recreate every day, play pickleball every day, water volleyball every day, bridge every day, and that kind of thing. And I think that's a mistake. And that it may be good for a while, but I think you need to participate in something bigger than yourself towards service. For me, one of my gifts is that I grew up being a folk singer, grew up in the 60s and 70s, and we had hootenannies. And if you know what the word hootenanny means, then you're from my generation, which people now don't know, young people. But I started a Hootenanny Ministry where I play for people in rest homes where people are very lonely, and also play for patients in their rooms at the local hospital here at the Villages. We all know that if you want to lift yourself up, the best way to do that is to lift somebody else up. And my Hootenanny Ministry has been the most rewarding activity of my retirement. And obviously with COVID, I've missed it now for almost 11 months. But I plan to be back. But that's been the most rewarding activity of my retirement, and I've gotten so much loving feedback and affirmation as a result of my doing that. There's a helper's high,
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like a great way to stay connected and engaged with, sharing your talents and all that, and staying active, but also getting all those natural good feel good chemicals in our bodies that science tells us that when you help others, we get those releases into our own bodies. So yeah, good way to get that boost, those feel good boosts. So we've heard each of you share this a little bit, what you're enjoying most now, but maybe you can go into a little bit more detail or something that you're looking forward to. And Scott, let's go ahead and start with you. So you talked about your ministry, and we shared with folks about your ballroom dancing. What do you have going now, or what's up and coming for you that you're excited about the most?
Well, thank you, Colleen. I'm certainly looking forward to being of service to people again. And COVID has made that very difficult in how I wanted to share my gifts with people. The ballroom dancing, I still continue and have continued over the last 11 months. I take probably 5 to 8 hours of dance lessons a week. And that's been my Prozac in this sort of shutdown time. And movement keeps you young. Okay. So whatever you do, be it walking around the block or doing ballroom dancing or pickleball or whatever activity, swimming, movement keeps you young. And
Hey, Scott,
so, yes,
Scott,
sir.
speaking of movement, I just finished reading Dr. Sanjay Gupta's book called Keep Sharp. And the number one way to keep your brain sharp, he summarizes with a single word: motion.
Yes, yes. Michael, about 3 years ago, Mark Middleton brought his dog and pony show here to the Villages, and he had his 7 best speakers give about 8-minute section talks. And all of them had done something exceptional after 60. For instance, I think her first name is Diane, but when she was 62, she's the first person to swim from Cuba to Florida without a shark cage. You know, it's like 120 miles, okay? And so there were people who had done phenomenal things in their retirement post 60, and all of them. I mean, there was one who was a gold medalist in swimming in the Olympics in the early 1980s. All of them said, you've got to move in order to grow bolder and not older.
Right.
Great advice. Pam, what about you? What are you enjoying the most right now?
Well, you know, I came to the conclusion I have like 40 years of fundraising and PR experience. And I was like, where's it all going? I've done some workshops, doing some mentoring, you know, helping other folks, you know, other organizations that I care about fundraise. I never am asked to sell t-shirts. I'm always asked to help raise money, which is fine. And I'm happy to do it. Doing fun things with my husband. We're traveling. Well, we were traveling. And again, we spent a lot of time. We have kids spread out all over the country. And so we are spending a lot of time doing that. I think a couple of things. The other thing I enjoy is the freedom to express whatever political or whatever views. When you're in the fundraising world, you really, and I was a lobbyist on the Hill in Washington. So you really cannot tell anybody what your politics is. But now I can say whatever I want, whenever I want, to whoever I want. And that's very freeing for me. I really like that because I spent a good deal of my career having to sort of, you know, keep it all stuffed inside. And I also think the last thing is I have friends of all ages. I have friends who are in their 80s and 90s, and I have friends that are in their 30s and 40s. And I think, you know, I don't live in a retirement community, although we do live in a condo here and many other folks are over 60, but I feel that it's really important that you don't just surround yourself with people of your own age. You know, it keeps you young and there's a sharing of information. I'm learning from them, they're learning from me. So those are the things that I'm really enjoying in retirement or
great.
whatever I'm doing.
Yes, yeah, so great. Mike, what are you into these days?
Okay, well, I heard her talk about freedom, so I'll mention that one of the joys of this phase of life is not, for example, being in a wine cellar beneath a village in France on a private tour, hearing a phone ring, watching a staff person pick up the phone in the middle of rapid French, hear him say, Mike Johnson. And it was my chairman tracking me down saying, I know you're on vacation, but I'd really like you to be thinking about the following. So it's nice to not get those kinds of phone calls anymore. I also enjoy having more control over my calendar. It's pretty much jammed, but I have a much stronger role in deciding what goes on that calendar on which dates and so on. As far as looking ahead, I want to keep traveling the world as long as I'm physically able. It's been a high priority for me for decades. I'll continue with SCORE for the same reason. I've led the Friends of the Library for many years. I lead 2 alumni organizations, my high school and Stanford. I'm not going to write, I'm often asked, are you going to write another book? In addition to the 6 historical novels, I've written 3 totally nonfiction books. The answer is, I'm not going to write another one, because if I do, it means that at my advanced age, I'll be devoting full time over 18 to 24 months, and I don't want to do that. But you heard me say I'm writing articles now, and France Magazine likes them, so they've published 2 of them, and I've got 3 more in the works, all based on travels. And that's on, and my family's spread out. I've never lived close to family, so I very much like to spend time getting on airplanes and flying to Georgia or flying out to Oregon or wherever to stay in touch with family. And let me just add that most of all, at this advanced stage of life, I'm grateful to have good health.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
Amen. Yep.
Yeah, so are we. We're glad for that for all of you. Peg, what's keeping you busy, and what are you focused on now or in the near future?
Well, I will continue to volunteer at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I've done that for 17 years in the temporary exhibit area, just once a week, but that keeps me busy. I sort of like Scott, I'm trying to give back. So I've been volunteering at my local branch of the public library. They're very kind to me over there. I just show up and they say, oh, here, why don't you do this? I don't do anything really hard or librarian-like, but I'm pretty good at filing books or finding books. So, and I'm enjoying the fact that I don't have any time clocks on me. And I'm getting to play much more tennis and golf, which I have liked my whole life and have been able to fortunately do it more now that I have the time.
That's
and
great.
Traveling, of course. It's kind of hard to think about traveling at this moment because I'm not sure where I want to go. I don't want to go where it's cold, so that leaves out, the Arctic Circle and Antarctica. So perhaps someplace warm again.
We've all had plenty of time to dream about where we would like to travel next, right? It's
Yes. Yep.
long lines. None of us miss those long lines in the airport or wherever when it has to do with travel. But I know we are eager to get back at it.
Colleen, can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
One more thing that has been so great about this for me is I've taken on 2 things that I would never have taken on before that I've wanted to do all my life. And that's, I started playing the banjo. I took banjo lessons. I know, seems weird.
Cool.
Awesome.
And the second thing is I also am writing a book. And so I took some, courses in writing, even though I may have a master's in journalism, but I still needed to take some courses in writing, memoir. So those are 2 things that I would never have done, never had the time to do. So I think
That's great.
New things is also an exciting part of this time of life.
Boy, you all are so inspiring. I can't wait to retire. As if I weren't excited enough already. Now I'm really chomping at the bit. So here's a fun one. What has surprised you the most? And I think some of you touched on this a little bit already, but Pam, we'll start with you. Is there, looking at this time of life, is there something that just really caught you by surprise?
Well, I think having as much fun as I'm having. I am a 7-year cancer survivor. So for me, I have become a very appreciative person and think that every birthday is a blessing and a gift. So I've really tried to maximize my time on earth, knowing, I think when you face the possibility that it's not going to be there, you kind of step a little bit out of, I think somebody was talking, maybe Scott, about your comfort zone to try new things. And so I don't know that it was surprising, but it's certainly, it's been a pleasant surprise.
Good.
I've enjoyed it.
Mike, how would you answer the question? What's been most
surprising? That was of the questions you told us you'd be asking. That was the answer that came to me the fastest. The thing that surprised me most has been the large number of people who've asked me, what's it like once you retire, Mike? Yeah. You can see that they really are eager to get a fix on what they should be expecting when they finally pull the plug on their own careers. Still happens to this day, and I've been out of the work world for a goodly number of years now.
Yeah. Well, that's part of what this panel is about, and you all are giving such great advice. And I like the idea of approaching it as a life change and approaching it holistically.
Yeah, I really do believe that getting up in the morning with goals that, as I said, go beyond playing golf or playing cards is really important to our mental and emotional health.
Mhm.
It's also finding, I think, just real quick, excuse me for butting in, but you know, you're so much of your identity is tied to your career,
Right.
you know, and so I think that that's a concern. Is that going to go away? You know, am I, you know, I'm getting recognized for this or I do that. But I think then you kind of just really, at least for me, really come into your own self and find out that the career was great, but that's not all there is to it.
That's so true.
Yeah, I certainly support that.
Peg, what has surprised you the most?
Um, I almost hate to admit this, but it was how easy it was to get into the, if you will, retirement routine. That I wasn't thinking about, you know, what do I have to accomplish today necessarily? And, you know, I wasn't thinking about work kinds of things. I was thinking about, I have time to play with my cats, or I have time to read the Sunday New York Times on Sunday instead of on Monday and Tuesday. So it was just, that was pretty much something that surprised me.
Yeah. And I'd like to get to Scott and hear what you have to say on this one, and then we'll go with some questions. We got a couple of really neat questions in the chat. So Scott, tell us about you.
Colleen, I've touched on this before, and I think the other panelists, one of the ways in which they were fortunate is that many of you were doing things in your workaday world. It may be connected to a club or a charity organization, and that spilled over into your retirement after you pulled the plug on the workaday job. And I think it's wonderful when retirees can carry over into their retirement certain skill sets that they developed in the workaday world, and they can still enjoy those skill sets as a retired person. But again, I think for me, and maybe I'm a little bit different than the other panelists here, that retirement, I think, is very much an undiscussed rite of passage, and that you're divesting yourself of all of the roles, of all the social hats you wore that gave your life as you were working purpose and direction and energy. And you're taking those hats off and kind of jumping off the building into retirement and hoping to build your parachute on the way down. Okay, so I think there's an emotional challenge to retirement that one should not neglect.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Incidentally, just as a Parthian shot, whenever Mark Middleton gives a talk about retirement, and again, he started this grassroots movement called Growing Bolder, he always ends every talk by saying, okay, everybody, let's carpa the hell out of the diem.
I like it. I like it. So here are a couple questions we have. And for this one, I'll just, you know, anyone who wants to jump in can. You've all been great panelists, and the discussion has flowed really freely. Let's see. How did you deal with the wag of the finger warning? You don't want to outlive your money. Well-intentioned advice, but also feeling very negative. Did any of you encounter that sort of thing, maybe from family or friends, when you shared, you know, this is my next step?
No, nobody ever posed that to me. And
Not me.
Nobody ever asked me if I could afford to do it. I think everybody sort of assumed, given where I was in my career, that yes, I could afford to do it. So, and by the way, I feel anybody who can retire and not have to worry about finances should be extremely grateful.
Colleen, I would approach it from a slightly different direction. I think a common question that people ask me is, how much money do you need in order to retire? Okay, and I think that's probably backwards. I think the question you need to ask is, what do I enjoy doing that I hope to pursue in retirement. And once you decide what the answer to that question is, you can then ask the financial question, okay, do I have enough money to pursue what I want to pursue?
Good advice.
Mhm.
All
Yeah,
of
one
you,
other thing, it's kind of an adjunct to that. I realized quite soon after I exited the corporate world, I had to learn to say no, because I started getting invitations to do some consulting work. And I did accept 2 short-term ones, like 4 or 5 months. But after that, I said, that's it. I'm not doing this anymore. If I wanted to do this kind of work, I'd still have my corporate harness on. So I learned to say no.
right. It sounds like you all were in good financial situations, which is wonderful. We did a panel recently about preparing for retirement, preparing your finances, or for financial independence, as Paul Gaidosh, our panelist, like to describe it. So I'm throwing this question in there. Are there any tips that you would share with folks in terms of things to do so that they can also, like you, take this step in a way that is prepared, and then live comfortably, or be able to do, Scott, to your point, those things that they want to do in retirement?
I'll address that in a couple of ways. One, I'm really grateful for the foundation that I received at OU, and there's a real reason for that. I had already, my family has a rich military heritage, so I decided to volunteer Army the morning after graduating from OU, which I did. And the Department of the Army happened to take a look at that degree I had from the script school and decided it needed an Army correspondent and liaison specialist in Korea. And that combination of that degree and the Army experience had 3 job offers in my lap just 4 weeks after I returned to the United States. I accepted one with General Electric, which took me to New York. For those reasons, I guess, I am eternally grateful to that foundation that I received at OU. The other thing, I'll just cycle back to what I said earlier, as you move through life, be open to possibilities. I mean, I went back to school twice, as was mentioned when they were reading my bio. Didn't have to do it, but I thought, this could probably help, going back to law school and graduate business school. And, so as I moved through life, I just, I'll go back to what Scott said. What did he say about carpe diem, Scott?
Yeah, carpe the hell out of the diem today.
Yeah, well, that's what I've tried to do during these last 50 years.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share any steps you took, or any advice you might give for that financial aspect?
Well, for me, and one of the questions on the chat was it a hard transition? Did you have a period of transition? And this goes back to what they were talking about. I was lucky because I stayed on as a consultant for 2 years. So I really could still manage my own schedule. I still had, somewhat of an, some income, but I did it at my time and my leisure. So for me, it was more of a transition than a hard stop. And so financially that helped. The other thing is, I suggest you get with a financial planner before you retire, and have somebody who's look at all your finances and help you make the decision about whether or not you can actually afford it, or what investments you have to make, or what investments you have to take. That's what I did. Of course, my son happens to be a financial advisor, so that was very helpful. He wasn't going to let me retire if I couldn't afford it. He doesn't want to be responsible for me, even though turnabout is for play. So I think 2 things is, again, the healthcare, I think, is a major issue if you're going to retire before 65. Maybe having some sort of transition if you don't want to have a hard stop, where you still have a little bit of income, but you have your time, and then getting with a financial advisor to give you some sort of heads up.
I would certainly support that, particularly the financial part, and probably the sooner you can start talking to somebody, the better.
Mm-hmm.
Just to do a little forecasting of what the next 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years looks like.
Yeah, Paul said it's never too early or too late. Just go ahead and get started and take those steps.
Right. I really think that's, along with your health, to me, that your financial position is the next most important thing to try to get a handle on. And so you can make decisions, make choices.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing we didn't talk about was downsizing. I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but we've downsized a lot. And, you know, instead of having one big house now, we have 2 condos.
Anyone else want to share any thoughts about that? Scott, I know you shared that you moved, right, from Columbus to Orlando and purchased a new residence.
I did. Of course, in Florida, no one has any basements. I don't know if you're aware of that.
There goes all that great storage.
Right. And so, yeah, there's no place to store anything. And so moving to Florida, you bet your life you're going to be downsizing a great deal. However, I'm more interested in the emotional downsizing that you need to do when you move into retirement, because you're giving up roles that gave you direction, meaning, and purpose as a worker bee. Okay.
Mhm.
And you're giving that up and you're starting over. And so there is a downsizing emotionally as you recreate yourself.
Yeah.
But if you look also at the change that you're making is sort of it's a new job. It's a new, whether you're volunteering or doing something, you still get up in the morning and if you're, choosing to volunteer, you've got a place to go. So to me, I didn't find it a difficult transition from working to not working. And I'm fortunate about that, but I also had some volunteer activities that I could continue and expand that I had been doing when I was working.
Yeah. So we have a few more questions that popped up. I might read through 1 or 2 of them or a couple of them, and if anyone wants to jump in. We had a question about having an adjustment period after retirement. I think a couple of you touched on that. So let's go with, there was one question about, did you have a goal or something that you wanted to do or have wanted to do that you've not been able to do because of finances or health or family situation, and how did you deal with that? And then there's a question about, have you had a hard time with getting people to see you in this new role? Or also anything else you might want to say about having 2 residences, like how did you decide where and when? So I know I'm throwing 3 questions at you. We have about 5 minutes left or so, but if anyone really has anything they want to share passionately about one of those.
Colleen, I'll take 20 seconds and address the question. Do your new friends, how do they relate to you as a retiree? And one of the first things you notice when you move down to the villages, all right, and whatever club or group, there's 3,500 clubs here. So be it volleyball, be it a book reading club, whatever it may be, no one cares. I'm serious about this. You could be a brain surgeon, all right. Nobody cares what you did before you retired. Yep. People don't even talk about it. Nope, they're going forward. What do you think of this book? Can you set a good volleyball, water volleyball in the pool? I mean, they don't care what you did beforehand. Nope.
I totally agree. It's like your SATs. Once you're out of high school, nobody really cares what you got on them.
Right, yeah. Colleen, I don't have I have just 2 things I'd like to say. And I think it's important to take time to get comfortable with being retired. And I would encourage people also to spend time understanding what it takes for each of them as an individual to be content. Is that volunteering? Is it spending more time with family members? Is it traveling? Is it part-time work? But you need to figure out what you need to do, what's good for you, and take the time to get that figured out.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in with any last thoughts or any answers to any of those?
I can talk about 2 residences real quick. We just bought a place in Columbus, which is less than a mile from my kids and grandkids, our kids and grandkids. We have 2 kids up there in Columbus. And so, we were going up there and we were staying with them, which is really nice and it's really sweet, but I love them. They love me. I want my own space. And so we had a good investment opportunity up there and we took it. So I looked at it as an investment that I'm going to be able to enjoy for the next 10 or so years. But our main residence is in here, but we go up there about twice a month. And that's how we made that decision. I know there's a lot of people who say, why wouldn't you want to, get a place in Florida or Arizona or something? Because for us, being near our kids is more important than sunshine.
Yeah, real briefly, I'll say I don't have a second residence, but there's a place I like to go to every year where I rent an apartment. It's a very small village in eastern France where I've made some friends over the years, and it's such a delightfully different environment from anything else that I've ever experienced. So one of my disappointments during 2020 was being grounded. My Delta miles account didn't move much during 2020. But yeah, I really, for example, in 2019, the village does an annual Armistice Day, which is now our Veterans Day program. So the mayor, with whom I became good friends, saw me and said, "How would you like to participate in our annual Armistice Day program?" I said, "Sure, I'll do that." So not a second residence, but certainly a second place I love.
Sounds like it. Great. Well, let's hope that 2021 enables you to get back to your family in France, your found family in France, and for all of you to get back on the road and do some more ballroom dancing and some more traveling. It's been great having you today. And thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences and insight and all your wisdom. Dory is going to wrap us up.
Wait, I think the five of us in unison should say, "Go Bobcats."
Thank you.
Go Bobcats.
Go Bobcats.
And thank you
Yes.
also. Thanks very much.
Go
Colleen.
Bobcats.
Sorry.
Thank you all
bet.
for being here. Thank you to our panelists for all of their, I think it's so nice to have such a wide range of people who, you all have different interests. You've all had very different life experiences, but you're in this new time and really focused on moving forward. And it's super exciting to see all the wonderful things that you've accomplished and the things that you have lined up to go next.
Well, thanks much for inviting us, Dory.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for the honor of participating in this. We so
Yeah.
appreciate it.
And the
thank
one
And
thing we
Mike,
all-
Peg, and Pam, thank you for your wisdom.
and the one thing we all have in common is we're all Bobcats.
Yes.
Yay.
So I wanted to, on that note, as Bobcats, I wanted to share some resources and upcoming events, not just with our panelists, but obviously also all of our attendees. So the Bobcat Network is a resource that is available to all Bobcats. It's basically like a Bobcat family LinkedIn meetup kind of thing. So you can create an account on there and connect with one another. And also some of our current students have the opportunity to reach out to you as well. So there's a lot of different things happening on there. So if that's something that everyone is interested in, you can definitely check that out. And then some of our upcoming events. So actually tomorrow, we have a new episode of our podcast that Colleen hosts. It's called Avant Grad with the Ohio Trailblazers. So we actually are having President McDavis, Dr. McDavis, who is a former president of Ohio University, on tomorrow. So you can check that out. John is going to drop the registration links in the chat. Then in a few weeks, we have Setting Off on Your Own, Becoming Your Own Boss. So for those of you who have always been interested in maybe starting your own career path, maybe that's your retirement plan, you can definitely check that event out with some other Bobcats who have some experience with starting their own businesses. And then last, in March, we have our Celebrate Women Conference. So really cool event that we've done for helped support and sponsor for a few years now. So would love to see all of you there as well. So with that being said, that's what we have for you today. Again, big thank you and shout out to our panelists and all of our attendees. Thank you for being here. And like our panelists said, go Bobcats.